So, Glenn, how are things down there in Wonderland?
Well, good to talk to you again, Marty, and thanks for having me back. As we're talking today, we're less than a week away from the upcoming elections, and it looks like, by all accounts, it looks like here in the House of Representatives, the only question is how many additional seats will the Republicans add, and then B, in the U.S. Senate, how many will the sufficient seats be added by the Republicans to take over the Senate? And it sure looks to me like the answer, at least to that second question, is yes. There are about 46 seats as we're speaking right now that most people regard as being locked up for Republicans in the Senate or close to locked up for 20. And then in the battle of the various really contested races that are widely being followed, the Republicans seem to have taken a small but consistent lead in enough of those that you're going to get to 51. And the question is, do you get to 52, 53, 54, those kinds of things? We'll find out. A lot of for people that might be listening to this, what a lot of people are looking at as an early indicator is the state of New Hampshire. New Hampshire comes in pretty early in the evening on the east coast of the U.S. There is a former Massachusetts senator named Scott Brown who's running against the incumbent Democratic senator in the state of New Hampshire, the next-door neighbor state, a woman named Jean Shaheen. And that has been a race that really tightened up and is in some polls is like a dead heat. And then there are also two U.S. House races going on in New Hampshire. Currently, the U.S. Senate seat and the two House seats there are all three held by Democrats. So the indicator or the tell might be that when New Hampshire comes in, if Republicans win none of those seats, it's going to be kind of a muted evening for Republicans. If they win one of those seats, either the Senate race or one of those two House races, then it looks like Republicans will probably be on the way to having the kind of night that most people think a decent night, a good night, but not like some kind of blowout night. But if they should win, Republicans win two or more of those seats, then saddle up. It could be a much bigger Republican night than anybody sort of recognized. So that might be one early tell for people to follow on Tuesday night.
Well, I notice everybody seems to be running as far away from Obama as they possibly can. Some are even prefer to call on Bill Clinton rather than Obama.
Yeah, I tell you, I've seen a lot of polling data, and that's one of the advantages to being, or disadvantages, the case may be, for being in the slot that I'm in. I do get access to private polling data, and it's really stunning how toxic Obama has become. I mean, he's obviously been radioactive with self-identified Republicans pretty much all along the way, but he is just doing terribly amongst independents or swing voters, and he's had a really muted. There's just a lot less intensity of support amongst Democrats, self-identified Democrats, who continue to support him, but they're not really happy about it, and they're certainly not. And of course, the concern for Democrats is that some of these intensity readings. You've got two things. You can take a poll and you can say, hey, things might look pretty close. Would you rather have a Republican or rather have a Democrat? Pretty close. But when you dig down in and you have intensity, how strongly do you feel that the intensity is way down at the moment on the Democratic side? And of course, if intensity translates into turnout ratios, what can become sort of a relatively close margin can turn into, if not a blowout, at least like a much bigger win than you saw. Now, the other side of it is that when you dig down into these numbers, you'll find that the people who are supportive of Republicans, the swing voters who are kind of saying, I'm going to vote Republican this time, they're doing it, but they're not really all that excited about it. They've got tremendous anxiety and a sense of foreboding about what's happening in their own personal lives. But they're very forlorn, frankly, because they think if they feel, and they tell people in these focus groups and things like that, it doesn't matter who I vote for. I vote for, Obama to go up there and give us change you can believe in, quote unquote. And instead, what he does is, he keeps. If you voted against George Bush because you didn't like George Bush and the Republican military policy, well, who did Barack Obama keep as his secretary? His defense secretary, it was George Bush's Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates. If you didn't like Bush's economic policies, who did he make his Treasury Secretary? It was George Bush's President of the New York Federal Reserve, Timothy Geithner. And, of course, nothing changed, obviously, at the Federal Reserve. Nothing changed in the bowels of Treasury. Nothing changed in the State Department foreign policy apparatus. In some cases, we had, obviously, you had a famous example would be Robert Kagan, who was part of that project for the New American Century, one of the big leading neoconservative think tanks that was one of the big drivers behind the engagement into Iraq and some of the other foreign adventures. Who is the the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs? It's a woman named Miss Victoria Nuland, whose husband is Robert Kagan. And so Victoria Nuland was the one that famously said, F the EU. She used the full word, though. Mm-hmm. F the EU in talking about machinations within the Ukraine. So the point being, wherever anybody is on any side of those issues, they despair because it doesn't matter. I elect Hillary Clinton, I get the same crowds running things.
Yeah, nothing seems to change. I mean, that if the Republicans have a bang up night here next week, nothing will change unless there's some sort of change at the leadership. I mean, Bonner's got to be thrown out, but I mean, what is the likelihood of that?
Well, let's talk about that, but let me just to reinforce your point when you talk about nothing's. If you say, okay, right now, the change that's for sure within the vector is who's going to be Senate Majority Leader. Is it going to be Harry Reid or is it going to be Mitch McConnell from Kentucky? Harry Reid obviously being the present Democratic leader, McConnell would be the Republican leader if everything goes according to Hoyle. Well, my question would be, okay, let's suppose you do have Mitch McConnell becomes the new Senate Majority Leader. Things would certainly be done differently over there, and there certainly would be some differences. But if anybody tried to seriously say that as a consequence of Mitch McConnell becoming Senate Majority Leader and the Republicans taking a majority in the Senate, if anybody thinks there's going to be any change at the National Security Agency or at the FBI or at the Federal Reserve or the NSA or the CIA or the so-called deep state that is running a larger and larger percentage of the decisions that are being made within our government, the unelected, unaccountable, unknowable, and unknown bureaucracies out there, anybody who thinks there's going to be any change in any of that, I think, is deluding themselves. So in that sense, people that argue, hey, voting doesn't make any difference because nothing's going to change, have got something of a point. Now, on the House side, there's the question: is there any sort of a chance that there would be? You have the continued Republican majority, but does Mr. John Boehner remain the Speaker? And I think that's going to depend on a number of things. The high likelihood is that he will remain. He will be the Speaker of the House. I suspect there is a possibility he won't be, but that would have to begin with the Republicans having a much smaller night electorally than a lot of people are sort of thinking. Maybe gains in the very low single digits, and then what happens? You've got the Republican majority coming back, but the composition of that majority changing a little bit. So there's a much more, a great many of the people that are about to be elected here are less favorable to Mr. Boehner than some of the people they're replacing. And the big race, not within the Republican conference, but is on the floor of the House. This is the very first day when the new Congress organizes officially in January, first thing you do is you elect a Speaker of the House, and there's a nominee that comes from each of the party caucuses, but it's actually a vote on the floor of the House of Representatives. So somebody has to get 218 votes. And if there were to be enough Republican defections not to vote for the Democrat, but just to vote for somebody other than Mr. Boehner, and Mr. Boehner did not get the 218 votes, after a ballot or two, and it became obvious there was a stalemate, and then you could expect there are other members out there who I think would be more than willing to step up and try to offer their own stuff, but they're not going to do it until it looks like there's some sort of a reasonable chance of winning. It's the old adage, don't strike a king unless you kill him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what happened to effectively really, I don't know, I guess you would call the Tea Party people and the Ron Paul.
Well, they're still there, and that's kind of the question. Is that group of people big enough and committed enough to what it is they're saying to become that margin of difference? So if you had a Republican majority in the House of Representatives that was not monstrously large, and you had a swath of Republicans that said, "Hey, we need a change, need to vote for somebody different," the math would work to deny. Now there are quite a few members that are people that are running who have actually specifically said they will not vote for John Boehner for Speaker, and then there's another cohort out there who have pointedly refused to say who they would vote for, or refuse to commit to voting for Mr. Boehner. So, and of course, there are 10 members coming back in November who didn't vote for Boehner at the beginning of the present Congress. So a lot of it, the possibility of something like that happening begins with taking a look at how big is the majority. Because if you have if you have Republicans have the majority, but it's a small enough majority that you could say, disaffected Republicans could say, "Hey, I'm withholding my support," and it'd be enough to keep the current Speaker under 218, then suddenly it could get interesting. But we're not going to know anything like that until after the election, until after next Tuesday.
Well, it certainly would be.
If the Republican victories come in on the high end of estimates, that pads the majority, so you could have a certain number of defectors, and you still could get to 218 without those defectors. And so, which makes it unlikely that something like that would happen in the first place. So, a lot of machinations and calculations there to be made.
I mean, of course, if I was a Democrat there, I would vote for the worst possible Republican, and that would be Boehner.
Well, that might be but I don't know that that's the way their brains work. It's not that.
Yeah, they're not that smart.
No. Well, it's that's really kind of going back to that whole deep state comment. One of the things is we've moved into something resembling a post-constitutional America. That there are certainly elements of the Constitution that are there and being followed, but government and state actors have more and more moved into extra constitutional things.
The Constitution, the courts have completely flipped it upside down. It's no longer a positive document of rights. I mean, the government gets to do whatever they want against you, and the burden is yours to prove that your rights were violated. So the Constitution, basically, the Supreme Court and everybody else is just torn up into shreds. It doesn't really exist.
Yeah, well, and I think until somebody finds themselves under the gun, as you found yourself, in the crosshairs of people that didn't really care for due process and the Constitution and the like, until they themselves get their personal ox gored, you don't see a whole lot of evidence of people being, completely exorcised over this.
No, because largely the press doesn't.
They get their personal ox gored. They're not in a position to do anything about it.
Well, the press in this country it's a shame, but I mean, they will not defend the Constitution themselves. We don't have a free press as they do a little bit more in Britain. I mean, that's why Snowden had to go over to Britain to The Guardian to publish it, and then all the U.S. press pretended it was the first time we ever heard about it. Come on. I mean, we were talking about it 2 years in advance, and it wasn't, in secret meetings or something. So, everybody that covers the Hill knew that they were taking everybody's emails and stuff. I mean, that was common knowledge.
Oh, they vacuum up. This phone conversation as we're having is being routinely vacuumed up, and it's not so much that in most instances it's not so much that there's some little guy on the other end of the phone, transcribing what we're saying and taking notes and everything. But they vacuum everything up. They run it through algorithms that do look for certain words and speech patterns and things like that, which might cause them to then zero in and have some real live human being listen to a recording of this conversation. But they now want total information awareness. They want to be able to track where you go, who you're with, what you spend money on, every phone conversation, every email, every website you click on, etc. And now that storage is so cheap, they just want to store everything forever. And if somebody like Martin Armstrong, we know is a troublemaker, but let's say somebody like me causes them a little more trouble than I'm causing them now, they say, well, give me everything on that Glen Downs.
Exactly. I mean,
and
that's
they pull everything up.
What people don't realize is that what I watched is how the government pretty much lies in all these trials, even against the mafia. No matter what you say, you can make a phone call and say, yeah, okay, fine, pick me up 5 pizzas on the way home. And an FBI agent gets on the line, it gets on the stand and says in his vast years of experience, that's really a code word to go pick up cocaine. And I watched them where they just pretend whatever it is you say. Some FBI agent gets on the stand and says, oh, no, that's really a code word for this. Your wife can say, pick up 5 bottles of milk. Oh, that was 5 people were coming over to do that. This is what they do, and I've watched it. It was just absolutely amazing. So storing everything that anybody ever says is highly dangerous. But the other thing in legal training that people don't realize is that somebody somebody can say to you, "Did you kill your wife?" Yeah, sure. When you transcribe that, see, he confessed. They don't realize what the damage of this stuff really becomes. And anything you say, they can turn into anything, and a joke becomes a confession. So that's the danger of them vacuuming up everything.
Well, one of my concerns has been, and now I've just kind of come to accept it operationally accepted, is that you expect that people are supposed, including self-described, conservatives, are supposed to be skeptical of government. And in fact, there's largely not that much skepticism. You see, most people, if something's done in the name of protecting you from terrorists, they say, well, if that's what it takes to keep us safe. And now there's obviously a rising cohort of people who are on the right and on the left and wherever else they are on the political spectrum that have a healthy skepticism about these things. But it's still a pretty significant minority of the general population. So all we can really do for the moment, other than to, raise public awareness of the problem through things like this, is, people need to, act as if, people that are aware need to at least act as if they're with the understanding that they are being tracked and that they are
true. But my point is that it doesn't matter because whatever you say can be twisted into whatever they need. So
Well, okay. Well,
that's the danger.
Then they might want to be careful about what they say on things like telephones.
Yeah, about anything. I mean, picking up pizza and milk, whatever.
Yeah, yeah. No, be careful. Yeah, okay, yeah, Guido, the pizza guy.
Yeah, I mean, some of the most, innocent type things, they turn around and just, I mean, I have seen, affidavits of FBI. Oh, well, it was very suspicious. He entered an office and left with a briefcase. It's like, why is somebody going in and out of their office with a briefcase suspicious? But I mean, they can basically do anything. But and that's my concern about it. I don't think some nerd is sitting there listening to absolutely every phone call. But as you say, they store absolutely everything, and then whenever they want, give me everything on this guy.
Well, let me ask you this: given this reality that we just described, here's what we just did a quick brief synopsis of where we are in this political cycle and where we are in terms of the rise of the surveillance and so-called deep state. Tell me where you think that fits into some of the larger cycles that you follow routinely. That's what people, I'm sure, that are...
Well, largely when you start moving into this area, and every empire, city-state, nation has done so. And once you get to that point, that is more or less the end game. That when the courts are all corrupt, then you affect investment. How can you really invest if the government can just take whatever they want and say, oh, well, it's suspicious that you're walking around with $20,000 in cash, which isn't even that much anymore. But, it's just crazy. And, they're tracking wires over $3,000. So this whole factor thing is, I mean, the world economy is collapsing so rapidly, and it's very disheartening because it's all about them and how much money can they get, and everybody's a criminal, and if you do anything outside, you must be doing it just to hide money, and it's just crazy, and it's a shame, but I mean, Americans have been thrown out of absolutely everywhere. And so it's really hard, and anybody that's working for us overseas and comes here, they're interrogated. It's like, why are you here? How many times? It's like, but if I go overseas, nobody interrogates me like that. Oh, okay, fine. How long are you going to be here? A couple of weeks. We're just over in Germany. I'm not harassed. Over here, I mean, the TSA people have called my phone twice because people have coming in. Well, why do you need them? Do you really need them here? What is the problem with you people? Everybody's just, it's really very bad. But, unfortunately, I think when the economy turns down, after, from 16 into 20, it's only going to get worse. And that's when things really are probably going to start really popping. And because now your revenue is collapsing, so they're going to get less and less tax dollars. They're going to blame people even hiding it more. And it just becomes a vicious cycle until they self-destruct. And unfortunately, this is the way everybody has collapsed. It's not through hyperinflation. If you have a mechanism that you sell bonds and you have a police force and stuff like that, you use these things. People have pointed out to Germany, hyperinflation, whatever. I mean, it was a revolutionary government. They didn't have they defaulted on all the bonds before, so there was no debt. And nobody would buy it, so they have to print. That's it. That was the only thing they had left. We still have bonds that people buy for now, and when that goes, now we're going to really start escalating down the whole slope. So those are my concerns. And where do we end up with at the end? Do we end up with more authoritarian type government, or are we going to recognize the error of our ways and go back the other way. But there is simply no way that this system can continue under this mechanism. And you can't continue to promise pensions and all this stuff to people in government, and then you just harass everybody that doesn't work for them and steal whatever they have to pay these people. It's crazy, but right at the municipal level, the system was never designed to last. They never funded pensions. Why should we? There's always somebody out there to tax. Well, when there isn't, you have trouble. And this is what's being caused. I mean, you have like a small municipality with 20 cops, 10 retire, but now you got to pay them, and then you have to hire 10 to replace them. So the cost of government starts going up exponentially. And that causes the whole thing to implode. So I don't think we have too much time left, but it's going to be interesting. So that's why I was curious with these elections. I mean, the real issue we'll find, it looks like the Republicans will probably take both sides, but the issue becomes leadership. Unless the leadership changes, there's not going to be anything that's going to happen from what I can see.
No, my sense is that for any really fundamental change, I'm not talking about tinkering around on the margins, but anything that really alter the vector that we're on as an economy and as a society and as a government is going to be change that comes from outside the system. It's going to be when the Visigoths, storm the gates of the barbarians storm the gates and overthrow whatever the current order is, and that's the question that you just raised. Is that hey, something like that's going to happen? A 21st century version of that is going to.
Yeah, I mean, historically it has to happen because the system that they have designed is not sustainable, and we're seeing the meltdown of Europe as well, where Brussels has created a huge bureaucracy, and it's all about defending that rather than actually helping the people of Europe. So,
that's exactly
interesting times.
Interesting times indeed.
All right, well, thanks a lot for joining us. I think we're going to watch the elections next week, and it'll be very interesting to see where we go.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me.